couple of prod gunmen had shot 4 men and a 15-year-old boy in Sean Graham's bookies. Catholic and Protestant working-class people had died on the Ormeau Road, and to a stranger it would have been impossible to look at the dead and tell what religion they'd followed or ignored in life. It had been used on too many occasions by paramilitary ASUs as a route from the markets to their operations, and sometimes it had taken them no more than minutes to leave the area, carry out an attack, and be safely back by their fires. Belfast is a small city by any standards, and yet a few yards of territory between two communities represented centuries of mistrust. Macallan had time to sip some sweet black tea and relax before the high tension hit her when the operation started to move. She looked down at the street again and reflected on how deep the shadows became in Belfast at night. Was it just her imagination? She'd always thought they seemed more threatening in this city, and they'd covered so many tragedies during the Troubles. People were dragged into the shadows and died there, or a dark shape would step out and blast the back of your head off. When you ventured out in this city at night, it was better to stay clear of those dark places. It was just early evening now, and very few of the natives had been brave enough to face the northerly gale that was whipping sleet into the faces of those who had ventured out. She couldn't see any of the police team, but she knew they were in place, and just as cold as she was. They were spread all along the route to the ASU's target, which the agent had identified as a uniformed police inspector. The terrorists had located his home address through their intelligence-gathering team, and the plan was to kill him in front of his house when he arrived home from his office at HQ. Not so unusual. Special Branch had told any number of officers they'd been targeted, and that men with guns were coming for them. Moving home of a night was part of the job, and if it happened, well, you just thanked your God that something wasn't stepping out of those shadows behind you. Macallan was almost a bystander in this operation, as she was an E-Department officer, or what had been known as Special Branch before the Royal Ulster Constabulary had been rebranded as the Police Service of Northern Ireland. It had been part of the deal for peace, a move to make the force more inclusive to the Republican side of the divide. Although the name Special Branch had gone, for the men and women doing the same job, it was still the branch. She ran the agent who'd provided the information for the job they were working. Wherever possible, branch officers stayed well away from day-to-day contact with dissidents, or operations against them, other than handling the agents who provided so much of the information on their activities. In most cases, the agents had been terrorists during the Troubles, or were still involved with the groups who wouldn't give up the fight. They could have been turned by the branch for all sorts of reasons, sometimes fear, sometimes money, and very often a basic instinct to survive. The majority were hard, dangerous men and women. Without them, the Troubles would have been even bloodier, longer, and at one point might have been lost. Such was the scale of carnage when it stretched out to the mainland and Europe. As it was, the security forces' penetration of the terrorist groups had crippled their capability, and, just as importantly, their will to keep the war going. The operation had been handed over to a uniformed firearm team who specialized in these situations. They knew what was required and did it with a minimum of fuss, and if the other side wanted to do it the hard way, then that was fine too. The branch were loathed by the Republicans, and not always loved by everyone on their own side, who saw them playing by a different set of rules to the men and women facing the terrorists on the street. The information on this operation had come from one of the most important agents in Northern Ireland, codenamed Cowboy. Macallan had run him for years, and normally would have handed him over to a more junior rank as she picked up her promotions, but he was just too important to lose, and provided paramilitary information from the heart of the organization. It was these dissident groups that were holding up the peace process, and a big push was being made to knock them out or weaken them to the point where they lost the will to fight. Macallan was worried, though. Cowboy had been too close too often, and he was starting to panic. Every time she met him, he stank of last night's booze, and he was spending too much of the money given to him by the taxpayer. In his world, the only people who had money were either touts or one of the increasing number who transferred their skills into drug dealing.